Good afternoon and welcome to the 2022 Solutions for Congested Corridors Program Workshop. If this is where you wanted to be, then you're in the right place. I know we still have people logging on, so we're going to give them about 60 seconds more before we go ahead and get started. I'm going to mute myself while we give people a chance to log in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, time is 1:03, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I see some people still logging in, but I'm sure they'll catch up as we do the welcome and some housekeeping. So again, good afternoon and welcome to the 2022 Solutions for Congested Corridors Program Workshop. You will hear us refer to the program interchangeably as program and SCCP throughout the course of this workshop. As a reminder, anytime we state we or us, we are referring to Commission staff. Alrighty, so a little bit about me. I am Naveen Habib. I manage this program, and I am joined today by Matthew Yascott, who is the Deputy Director of SB1 Programming, to cover today's workshop. We also have additional members of our team joining us today to help moderate this workshop. This includes Kayla Giese, Celeste Aceves, and Cherry Zamora. In these workshops, we plan to review and amend program guidelines to prepare for the next program cycle. These guidelines govern how the program will be implemented, facilitated, and reported on, as well as how funds will be distributed to reimburse agencies for expenditures. A little bit about the program. Kayla, if we can move to slide 3. Before we get started, I would like to share a quick refresher about the program for those of us who may be new or might need a quick refresher. Established in 2017, Senate Bill 1, the SCCP provides funding to regional transportation planning agencies, sometimes referred to as RTPAs, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans to reduce congestion throughout the state. Since then, $250 million are appropriated annually from the state highway account to accomplish the mission of this program. The program is currently on its second cycle, covering fiscal years 2021-22 to 2022-23, with 7 projects programmed for $500 million in funding and total project costs valued at $2.6 billion. And with that, let's move on to some housekeeping items. I see more people have joined us. So Kayla, please walk us through the GoToWebinar logistics, please.
Thanks, Naveen. Good afternoon, everyone. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. The workshop agenda is located under the Handouts tab and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar. You can also find the agenda on the Commission's website. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handout tabs. Under the audio tab, you have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as a part of each topic at this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. There are two options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make that comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, please use the raise hand feature as early on into the topic as you can to give the system time to recognize you. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type in the topic you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. Thanks for joining us today, and we appreciate your feedback. Back to you, Naveen. Naveen, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There we
Try
go.
not to do that. All right, thank you, Kayla. I was just saying that, like what Kayla said, if you have any questions about the GoToWebinar logistics, or you're having any issues raising hands or anything, just go ahead and shoot a comment in the comment box, and we'll try our best to help you out. Okay, so if you have joined us previously, I think we can go to the next slide, Kayla. You may be aware that agendas are posted up to 10 calendar days in advance of each workshop. Presentations and recordings are posted after each workshop. We will email any key decisions made during a workshop to all attendees following that workshop. We will also make recommendations based on the consensus reached over the course of roughly 2 workshops. For timeliness, additional time on any topic may be limited to ensure all scheduled topics are covered during the allotted time for any given workshop. Similarly, previously covered topics may not be readdressed at subsequent workshops unless determined necessary. Finally, a reminder to all attendees, as Kayla just said, if you plan to make a comment or ask a question, please remember to clearly state your name and your organization's name before making your comment. You may raise your hand or add a comment in the questions box at any point during our presentation, and we will ensure all comments are addressed as received. So moving on to the next slide, Kayla. I think it's important for us to just do a quick workshop recap from our previous workshop, which took place on September 28th. We covered lessons learned from the previous 2 program cycles, the proposed program schedule for cycle 3, which we will dive deeper into today, and an overview of proposed technical changes to draft guidelines, comprehensive multimodal corridor plans, and CAPTI strategies impacting SCCP for the upcoming cycle. Among the larger proposals we presented were the requirement that the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA, and the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA, clearance be achieved prior to program adoption, as well as the requirement that all comprehensive multimodal corridor plans be in accordance with the Commission's comprehensive multimodal corridor plan guidelines. The CEQA and NEPA recommendation did spark a robust conversation at the last workshop. Therefore, we will be considering comments and suggestions received and bringing this proposal back to a future workshop for discussion. As far as the CMCP proposal goes, I am now going to present the revisions to the SCCP guidelines based on the discussion from the last meeting. Kayla, if we can move to the next slide. So we addressed CAPTI Strategy 1.2 at the last workshop. To reiterate, CAPTI Strategy 1.2 promotes innovative, sustainable transportation solutions in SCCP by requiring CMCPs. Specifically, the strategy will pursue the requirement that all projects be a part of a multimodal corridor plan consistent with the Commission's comprehensive multimodal corridor plan guidelines. On the next slide, we demonstrate the resulting change to the SCCP guidelines in Cycle 3. For reference, this is Section 5 of the 2020 SCCP guidelines. I think, did we move on to the next slide, Kayla? That's the one. Thank you. This slide may be just a little bit difficult to read because the font is exceptionally tiny, but hopefully you can make it larger on your screen when we do share the presentation later today. Again, this text is available for review in Section 5 of the 2020 SCCP guidelines. Ultimately, we are keeping the language in the white text and striking out the yellow text from the existing guidelines. This means we will be removing the reference to existing plans, updated plans, hybrid plans, and new plans, since the requirement is now simply that all projects nominated for this program must be included in a multimodal corridor plan, prepared in accordance with the comprehensive multimodal corridor plan guidelines adopted by the Commissioner, in December 2018. We understand that there may be some nuances to what this means for specific types of new plants, and we will work with any agency on those nuances accordingly or address any questions that you may have. I would like to pause for a minute and ask Kayla to see if there are any questions or comments at this time about what we've just covered in the recap portion.
Hi, Naveen. I'm not seeing any written comments or questions or hands raised at the moment. Just a reminder that if you're having audio issues, go ahead and check your audio options and make sure that if you're joining us via telephone, make sure that you've entered an audio pin that you should be able to see under your audio tab, and that should help any issues you might have to be able to hear us. That will allow you to actually participate in the workshop. So that's just if you're joining us by telephone. Other than that, oh, we do have a question actually that just came in.
Awesome, let's hear it.
So let's see. So this is from Christina Watson. If the project already has a corridor plan, does that document need to be revised?
Can you say that one more time, Kayla? I think you cut out in the middle a little bit for me.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is from Christina Watson. If the project already has a corridor plan, does that document need to be revised?
Matthew, did you want to cover that? You just came on.
Thanks, Naveen. I came on only in case you needed me to chime in, but now that I've started talking, I would respond to that question and say the plan would need to be revised or redone if the plan is not in accordance with the Commission's Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan guidelines, which are also available on the Congested Corridors Program website. So I know it's kind of a tricky answer. I'm not going to say, you know, if the Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan was drafted in accordance to or happens to be in accordance with the CMCP guidelines, we are not requiring that, you know, plans from cycle 2 that were done in accordance with the guidelines have to be revisited or redone for cycle 3. Unless that CMCP or the Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan was created before the CMCP guidelines in 2018, you may need to revisit whether or not that plan is in accordance with those guidelines.
We have one more written in question, Naveen. This is from Paul Krupka. Does CTC maintain a library of multimodal corridor plans?
That's a good question. I don't think we do. Do we, Matthew?
So, Naveen, we don't. I mean, so comprehensive multimodal corridor plans are typically done through a region's metropolitan planning organization. So for instance, if SCAG is the MPO for a plan, you can go on SCAG's website actually, and they will post all of their CMCPs. If you follow the CMCP guidelines, there's a very rigorous public process that planning agencies are required to go through. And because planning documents are typically in large size, file size, they're not usually submitted entirely with the application package. They're typically linked to an MPO's website. So if there is a particular plan you're curious to see from a project that has been submitted, either funded or not recommended for funding, feel free to reach out to Naveen or I, and we'll identify it for you and put you in touch with either the MPO or send you a link to the file directly.
Thanks, Matthew. We do have one more comment that just came in. This is from Stephen Hanamakai. FlowCog supports these revisions and suggests greater emphasis on funding projects identified in CMCPs prepared in accordance with CTC guidance.
Thank you.
That's it right now for written questions and comments, and I'm not seeing any raised hands right now.
Okay, then I think we can move on to the next slide, Kayla, if you will please. So in today's workshop, we plan to focus on CAPTI Strategy 1.1, review funding restrictions, discuss potential changes to eligibility criteria, address Cycle 3 and its funding, and lastly, we will cover key topics for subsequent workshops. In the navigational bar on the right in GoToWebinar that Kayla advised on earlier, reference documents are included as attachments for your reference and your convenience. And you can also find these on the workshop webpage on the Commission's website. Reference documents include the workshop agenda, the 2020 SCCP guidelines, and the CAPTI action plan. Kayla, if there are no questions or comments, I think we can move on to the next slide. And at this time, I would like to reintroduce Deputy Director Matthew Yoscott, who will be presenting CAPTI Strategy 1.1. Take it away, Matthew.
Thank you, Naveen. Okay. So I would now like to introduce some ideas on how the Solutions for Congested Corridors program can address CAPTI Strategy 1.1. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, thank you. To reframe the CAPTI strategy, Strategy 1.1 is to prioritize Solutions for Congested Corridors program projects that enable travelers to opt out of congestion. This strategy states that through its public guidelines development process, the CTC will work towards updating the SCCP guidelines and scoring criteria to better prioritize projects that provide travelers with options to opt out of congestion. These innovative, sustainable transportation solutions should focus on reducing vehicle miles traveled and could include investments in bus and rail transit, active transportation, and highway solutions that improve transit travel times and reliability, such as price-managed lanes with transit service, dedicated transit lanes, and transit signal priority, or that generate revenue for VMT-reducing projects through employing vehicle demand management strategies. For reference, this strategy can be found on page 22 of the published CAPTI, which I believe was included as a workshop handout for today's workshop. In the subsequent slides, I will pose 3 separate options to stoke conversation in this workshop, but please keep in mind that these options are merely conversation starters. I will cover all 3 slides and then open it up to thoughts, suggestions, or questions. We will take any comments or feedback back on any of the 3 options and bring that back with a consensus-driven proposal at the next Congested Corridors workshop on November 18th. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Okay, and that's another one that's a little tough to read, and I do apologize for that. But this PowerPoint will be posted on the Commission's website following this workshop. So this slide contains option A. The wording in white is pulled directly from the Solutions for Congested Corridor Program Guidelines, which is in section 16.1, Primary Evaluation Criteria, and that can be found on page 9 of the existing program guidelines. Since this CAPTI strategy outlines changes on changes to how solutions to congestion are defined, we felt that this was the most applicable section of the guidelines to propose these options. I'll now cover the contents of this slide with this options proposed language in yellow font. So I will actually cover all the words on the page just to kind of frame what would eventually be the evaluation criteria. So the primary evaluation criteria, and again, keeping in mind, the words in white are what's already in guidelines, and the yellow words are the proposed proposal for this option. The primary evaluation criteria will be based on how well a project meets the primary objective of the program of addressing congestion by making specific improvements designed to reduce congestion in highly traveled and highly congested corridors through performance improvements that balance transportation improvements, community impacts, and that provide environmental benefits. The project shall identify, so this is considered the first part of the primary evaluation criteria. The project shall identify the extent of congestion in the corridor, including the congestion of all modes. The nomination should address current community and environmental impacts with existing condition. The nomination should discuss how much worse will the problem get under the no-build environment, and it should identify if other improvements have been done in the corridor and the impacts of not completing this corridor. Identify and discuss other issues that the corridor may face. So the second part, which is speaking to the solution to the defined congestion, discuss the proposed solution in the corridor. How will the proposed improvements relieve congestion? Does the project incorporate multiple modes? How will the project, and here's some proposed language for this option, reduce or minimize vehicle miles traveled while maximizing person throughput through the corridor? How is this solution balancing transportation, environment, and community? Why is this solution the most beneficial improvement in the corridor? What improvements to other modes were considered and why were they not selected? For highway and local road projects, will the project induce demand? And then this last portion is proposed language as a sub-bullet to the solutions portion of this criteria. Solutions that include the following will be better prioritized for funding. Investments in bus and rail transit, active transportation, and highway solutions that improve transit travel times and reliability or generate revenue for VMT reducing projects through employing vehicle demand management strategies. This option is derived directly from the CAPTI strategy and is demonstrated as a sub-bullet. And again, I'm going to cover all three options and then we'll open it up to questions and comments. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Thank you. Option B is indicated on this slide. I won't cover all of the existing guidelines language again, but again, I will point out that the proposal for this option is indicated in yellow text. Again, proposing adding the words reduce or in front of minimize VMT in the solutions portion, and including the sentence at the end of the paragraph which states, projects that provide travelers with options to opt out of congestion, such as those that reduce or minimize vehicle miles traveled, will be better prioritized for funding. This option is also derived directly from the CAPTI strategy, but abbreviates it to be included with the rest of the solutions language and the evaluation criteria. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Thank you. Option C is indicated on this slide. Again, I won't read off the existing language, but I'll point out that the proposal for this option is in yellow text. This option adds a new bullet to this evaluation criteria, stating, describe how the project's expected benefits are supported by local land use policies. How will future land development, described and enabled by zoning, permitting policies, or other local land use policies, maximize the project's potential to reduce congestion? If the project's potential to reduce congestion is based on anticipated residential development in key areas, the nomination may also demonstrate housing supported policies by showing the local jurisdiction has received a pro-housing designation from the Department of Housing and Community Development's Pro-Housing Designation Program. This option is a bit more out of the box, but does pose an intersection between CAPTI strategies 1.1 and 7.1. CAPTI strategy 7.1 suggests the better consideration of pro-housing principles in the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, as well as some of the other SB1 programs. The thought behind this option is that housing and land use focused policies can also be those which are meant to encourage travelers to opt out of congestion and in turn lead to reductions in vehicle miles traveled. So as I've mentioned before, and a bit separate from this slide, the Commission staff have been working with the Department of Housing and Community Development to propose a better integration of pro-housing related principles into this program's efficient land use evaluation criteria. This will be a more prevalent topic in our November workshop, and this option that I'm presenting to you today is meant to explore that in this evaluation criteria as well. Move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so now that I've covered the three separate options, I'll say that staff does not have a preference on any of these options and that they were presented to stoke conversation. I would now like to open it up to stakeholder feedback. This slide in particular contains an overview of the proposed options for ease of reference, but we can also go back to any of the individual option slides if necessary. One thing I do want to point out is that the better prioritization of projects referenced under options A and B is not intended to provide VMT reducing projects with an increased evaluated credit. Rather, it is meant to demonstrate that should projects compete equally through all of the evaluation criteria and arrive at the same or very similar ratings, the project that is deemed to reduce vehicle miles traveled would be prioritized for funding. At this time, we'll collect any feedback, and if we hear any feedback or any questions verbally today, as I mentioned, we will bring that back and revisit this proposal at the next workshop. And I will now turn it over to Kayla to see if we have hands raised or any questions coming in.
Hi, Matthew. We do have a few written comments and then some hands raised. So I'll go ahead and read these and then turn it over to Celeste. So our first comment is from Patricia Chen. She said, option A looks reasonable. I just want to clarify whether demand management includes managed lanes and basically whether managed lanes are a prioritized use of SCCP funds. Thank you.
I believe, okay, so going back to the actual CAPTI strategy, which I'm going to pull up on a separate screen for myself. So give me one moment, Patricia. I would say that yes, managed lanes, price managed lanes with transit service as a recipient of the revenues generated by a managed lane would be considered in accordance with that part of the strategy, and within the realm of better prioritized when it comes to that language and in the addition as well. I hope that answers that question. I was kind of skipping my screens here. And Patricia, if it didn't, you can type in or raise your hand.
Okay, so, Patricia just responded and said, yes, thank you. Okay. So our next one is also kind of a comment / question. This is from Hillary Blackerby. Option A is superior. Would a standard HOV lane count as something that would benefit transit travel times throughput, even though transit wouldn't actually be given any more priority than HOV eligible personal vehicles? Ideally, it would need to be more beneficial to transit than just a standard HOV lane.
That's a very good consideration. I understand that HOV lanes do provide, I would say, automatic access to transit, to transit operators or transit vehicles. But it would, maybe that's a good conversation for us to have. I think, ideally, if an HOV lane was submitted for consideration in this program, and there were benefits to transit service or transit travel time, that would have to be explicitly stated in the application, and it would be considered as such. But I wouldn't be able to answer whether or not I would say that an HOV lane would fall under the category of better prioritized, simply because I don't believe that the CAPTI strategy itself is referencing high occupancy vehicles necessarily.
Okay, we do have one more written question that came in before I turn it over to Celeste for the raised hands. This one is from Paul Krupka. It seems to me options A and B could be combined and simplified. Is this possible? Is the issue of funding priority a discriminator?
I mean, they could be combined, I guess. When we created option B, it was meant to, as I mentioned, abbreviate the language from option A. So if the suggestion is to include the kind of sub-bullet that option A presents and also include the additional sentence to the second bullet that option B presents, is that what he's referencing? And then I might need you to repeat the last portion of his question.
Thanks, Matthew. Let's see, one more comment. Stephen Hanamakai said option A strikes a good balance. Option C would seem to exclude projects in more rural parts of the state. We support option A.
Okay. And
That's
Stephen,
it for,
Stephen,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Stephen is with St. Louis Obispo Council of Governments, I believe, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll turn it over to Celeste now for hands raised.
Thanks, Kayla. Our first comment will come from Mike Woodman. Mike, it looks like you're, there you go.
Thanks, Matthew. This is Mike Woodman with the Nevada County Transportation Commission and chair of the North State Super Region. At this point, I would lean towards option A. The one thing, I want to caution and make sure we're cognizant of is we look at incorporating the CAPTI strategies is that we're careful that we're not disadvantaging rural projects in the program. For example, truck climbing lanes are eligible in the Congested Corridors program. Those projects in rural areas are typically considered exempt for air quality conformity and not considered to induce VMT. So we wouldn't want to disadvantage projects like that. So just keep that in consideration. Both the North State Super Region and Rural Counties Task Force look forward to kind of continued partnership as we develop these guidelines and just make sure. And, one other thing that I'll point out is in the CAPTI, the language talks about investing in projects that don't significantly induce VMT, to where this language is talking about reducing VMT, which, granted is a good thing, but I just want to make sure we're careful that we're not disadvantaging certain rural projects, and this program can address needs statewide.
Absolutely, Mike, and I really value your comments. So I have a couple, or I have one response and one request. So yep. My response primarily is that each of the proposed options, or at least options A and B, are not to suggest that projects would evaluate differently from the outset, right? They would suggest that after projects were evaluated across all the evaluation criteria that we currently have, if it gets down to a point where, for instance, there's like a middle ground of projects or projects that score equally, and as we all know, when we have competitive funding programs, we receive requests that far exceed our funding limit. It comes down to the question of where does the line get drawn, right? And so the better prioritization factor is, we would draw the line and consider if it's one project compared to another, the suggestion is to put that line above the project that also reduces VMT. So I'm not saying that you didn't understand that. I think, but I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on that. My request for you, Mike, or any agencies that you represent, would be if there is a way that you see this language, on the screen or in the PowerPoint, or of any of the options, if there's a way that you would suggest to revise it to make sure that, rural agencies are not, particularly disadvantaged through this, policy change, I would be happy to take a look at that suggested language and try and weave it into a proposal or a set of proposals that we can bring back or will bring back at the next workshop.
Great, thank you. We're happy to do that.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Sarkis Kachek.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, how's it going, Sarkis?
Pretty good, how are you, Matthew? So thank you for the options and that you're providing today on CAPTI Strategy 1.1. Related to strategy or option A, I just did want to clarify when it says and highway solutions that impact travel times. that does indeed include high occupancy vehicle lanes, as long as with other managed lanes?
It does, but obviously, I kind of going back to the original comment, and in the essence of the CAPTI strategy, there would need to, there would need to be an identification of how that HOV would support, those transit travel times and reliability of the transit service in part of the narrative, right? I think ultimately, that would have to be an emphasis in order for us to consider that as meeting this this additional option.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Dave Campbell.
This is Dave Campbell, Advocacy Director with Bike East Bay, a walk bike advocacy organization nonprofit in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. And obviously, option A sounds good. It has the words active transportation. We like that. B also sounds good, quite honestly, giving people options to get out of congestion like walking and biking can do. So in general, they both sound good to me. Maybe a similar question from a previous question to staff. What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of the language in A and B for walking and biking?
Well, again, I would say, and I'm one member of this team, I don't see, significant differences between A and B necessarily in terms of what they might result in us, considering at the end of the day, right? They both allow for projects, and those that support active transportation or those that support transit, they both allow projects to compete against other projects through the evaluation criteria. And I do believe that both options A and B preserve the priority for projects that, that ultimately would end up reducing vehicle miles traveled, and active transportation is a mode that does that. In terms of if either of those, and again, I'm not quite sure if I am following your question entirely, but does it sound, or to me it sounds like, are you asking if there's a way that active transportation could be a bit more emphasis, or did I cover what you were getting at?
Well, A says active transportation as well as transit.
Correct.
And B says things that get you out of congestion, which I interpret to mean transit and walking and biking. And so to me, they read very similar. But A also says you can do things like HOV lanes if it improves transit, that sort of stuff. And so I'm just trying to get your perspective.
Okay.
Which is better for walking and biking? That's the one I support.
Got it. I wouldn't say that I would consider either option to, supersede the other in terms of if we're putting more emphasis or more prioritization on active transportation and transit, because I do think projects that provide travelers with options, those options could be the result of managed lanes that collect revenue, and that revenue supports transit service, or that revenue supports active transportation infrastructure improvements. So I do see them the same, but I understand that the words are very different. And so if you're suggesting, so if you prefer to see the words active transportation explicitly stated, I would say that option A is probably the one that it sounds like your preference would be, but I wouldn't see that either of them would place priority, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do think I like seeing active transportation in there, and we have many projects in the East Bay, including the Bay Bridge, that are congested, and bike and walking improvements on those corridors should and need to be part of the solution. So
Understood.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Our final raised hand is Paul Krupka.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for doing all that you do to improve our lives. So when I look at these, and my questions related to A and B and why aren't they combined? When I look at these, what I hear or what I read is ways. These are terms, additional terms to help us determine whether our project might be eligible or could score well. Am I reading that right?
I don't think I would go that far.
Okay.
So obviously if an applicant has a general purpose lane in mind, general purpose lanes are not eligible to receive funding in this program. So a general purpose lane is not a consideration. But I would not construe these to either of these options being included in the guidelines. If either of them ends up included, I would not take these. So and I do believe Naveen later in this presentation is going to cover eligible project types or eligible delivered projects. And any of those that are listed will continue to be eligible. We are not prohibiting any of those that are listed, or not proposing to prohibit any of those that are listed currently in the guidelines, nor would we be statutorily allowed to prohibit certain types of projects. And you'll have to forgive me. I've been on a bunch of different meetings lately. I'm not sure if we covered the statute that presides over the Solutions for Congested Corridors program in this workshop, but we can provide that as well. But again, so I would say these are both meant for evaluation purposes, which I know if a project is right off the bat deemed non-competitive, that's a way of prohibiting it, and I do not see either of these options doing that. This is, again, once projects are evaluated from start to finish through the evaluation process, these considerations are made for like competitive projects, and the priority would go to the ones that are in line with this CAPTI strategy. So I said kind of a lot. I don't know if I hope I didn't sound like I was talking around your question, but
no, you weren't, Matthew. You weren't. Then I have just two comments. Then
okay.
What I see here is important metrics. First one, in A, I see VMT reducing projects. Second one, projects that reduce or minimize VMT, vehicles miles traveled. Those two are prioritized for funding. And I said, I get that, but is it necessary to put all these words in there when what you're really looking for is a metric? And that metric is show us how your project reduces VMT. End of statement. Second point there is I think that the issue of priority funding needs to be addressed as a part of C. Are you indicating that this might, if we look at C, this might help us would it be considered for funding priority, better prioritized for funding?
I see what you're saying, and I wouldn't, again, I don't think it would right off the bat if a project were to come out of an area or a region or a jurisdiction that's in line with option C, I would not say that that project automatically has like a head start on a competitive advantage. What option C presents are a lot of, a lot of characteristics with jurisdictions that have policies in place that are deemed pro-housing or pro-efficient land use. And those types of policies are also, there's an intersection between those policies and, the idea of reducing vehicle miles traveled. Obviously, if transportation is going where there's a need and an existing population, it's preventing people from needing to travel longer distances. But I think option C would be fleshed out a bit more. And if you do have specific questions about how that might look, or if you have suggestions on how you might consider that, we can certainly talk about that in the next workshop, because we will actually be exploring the efficient land use evaluation criteria, which is not one of the primary evaluation criteria, and we'll be inviting housing and community development to the November workshop.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I appreciate your thoughtful responses, and this is a big deal, I know, so thank you.
Thank you.
Matthew, we did have another hand raised if you want to take hand raise from Louis.
Let's keep going with the hands raised, and then we can move to the written questions.
Okay, perfect. Louis Zhao.
Was out Orange County Transportation Authority. Hey, Matthew and Naveen, thank you for giving us the opportunity to comment on this. So I'm looking at option A and B. So for A, I feel like it's more of you're outlining specifically the types of projects you want to prioritize. That's fairly clear to me here. Option B offers a little more flexibility for innovation. So if there are projects that could reduce VMT, I feel like option A would be excluding that. And I think that's, there's been discussion about potentially combining A and B, and that may help offer that ability to be flexible and explore new types of projects that could provide the benefit you're looking for.
Okay.
So that's my comment on that. On C, as a transportation planning agency and as a transit operator, it's very hard for us to look at these housing-based policies and these housing-based metrics. And every time I see something like this, I'm trying to figure out how well I would score here. And as an agency, I can't really influence those things. It's very difficult for us to look at this and think about how we would compete well. So that's something that that's a comment that I have. When we're looking at these housing policies, it's very difficult for not just the planning agency, but also the transit operators who could greatly benefit from this program. We're probably going to lose out in this in these metrics for criteria for option C.
Okay.
That's my comment. Thanks.
No, thanks for the comments, Louis. I think I absolutely expect our applicant agencies, when they participate in our workshops, to certainly have projects in mind that they're advocating for through their ideas in the guidelines development. So if, for instance, C seems, and I won't ask you to identify a project out of OCTA that wouldn't compete well if C became a part of the program. But if you have, examples that you're willing to provide, it would be good insight, I think, for my team and I, just based on what you're saying. So I appreciate the comment.
And just to follow up, I don't know how many agencies have that pro-housing designation, but I think it would be good for HCD to come back next time around in the next workshop to mention, maybe list a number of them or something, or at least let us know how many actually have that designation.
Well, so Louis, let me clarify a bit, because this isn't all about actually having the pro-housing designation, even though it does say may demonstrate housing supportive policies by showing receipt of a pro-housing designation. I think there, and HCD will elaborate next workshop, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but the pro-housing designation program was implemented over the summer, so it's fairly new. And you know, they're starting to receive applicants to this program, but by the time these guidelines are adopted, late summer of 2022, I'm right there with you. I think, you know, personally, I think that there will be pro-housing designated jurisdictions, but we would have a large applicant pool that is still not there or still hasn't sought application, and we do not want to draw a line in the sand just yet. So if anything, the inclusion of this language is meant to encourage you know, there are policies that support a pro-housing designation. My understanding is that's how Housing and Community Development will determine that. And those policies are already in place where, you know, local jurisdictions or regions have taken on housing and land use friendly policies. And so this is meant to point in that direction, or it was optioned to point in that direction. But I agree. We wouldn't want to suggest including language that would you know, disadvantage a majority of our applicants.
Thanks, Matthew. This is Kayla. We have a handful now of written comments and questions.
Okay.
So I'll start off with the first comment, and this is from Nicole Chang. Hello, this is Nicole, a policy assistant with Climate Plan. Thank you for your time in creating these strategies. Initial thoughts for me would be to include language that would assess how projects benefit communities or have community support and prioritize these projects when drawing the line after scoring.
Thanks, Nicole. I really briefly want to refer to Nicole's comment because I think that's a great comment. We are proposing, it's not within the context of strategy 1.1, but we are proposing an integration of you know, outcomes that are more equitable, and that is something that I know I've been talking about at commission meetings and in some of these workshops, and that's something that we will be bringing to a future workshop. So just to say, thought is heard, and it's being considered, and we'll have a platform to talk about it.
Thanks, Matthew. The next comment is from Jay Jordan. Each option has good components. Projects should at least allow travelers to opt out of congestion. They should also support clear mode shifts to active transportation and VMT reduction, walking, cycling, transit, for example. Let's see. Option C is important because it is addressing the connection here to land use and importance of local policy, which is important in rural areas too.
Okay.
And then the next few are questions. So this one came in from Steve Bertelbo. What does it take to convert general purpose lanes to HOV or hot lanes? And are road user charges and cordon pricing part of the discussion?
That is a good question. I don't know if I'm able to answer that off the top of my head. You know, not being a planner or an engineer myself, I cannot recall if we've received applications that are suggesting to convert general purpose to HOV, and that's not to say that we have not received those types of applications, but they're just not occurring to me on the spot. But in terms of pricing, you know, price lanes are absolutely considered. We have funded price lanes, and I believe that these options A and B, and kind of in the thread of this CAPTI strategy, price lanes are considered a strategy that ultimately lead to reduction of vehicle miles traveled.
Thanks, Matthew. Just one more written in question from the same attendee. This is from Jess Avila. Option A, if two agencies partner to submit an application that includes requests for purchasing buses in conjunction with funding for a managed lanes project, will the application get some type of priority? And then he also asked, what specific performance measures will you be looking for on a project where ITS elements are utilized, such as transit signal priority devices, to improve bus travel times on managed lanes projects, which includes additional VMT? Let me know if you'd like me to go back to the first one.
Yeah, I'm going to take the first one first, and I might ask you to repeat the second one. So the first question, I believe, had to do with if you could even have a single applicant or a single implementing agency that's a transit operator and kind of resides over the system. If you were proposing an HOV lane and you're proposing, a rolling stock acquisition or a bus acquisition, and for instance, the additional fleet would be expanding the service as opposed to potentially, terming out, a retiring fleet. That an expanded transit service or more robust transit service would be a consideration. And if the story is presented such that this transit service would operate along this corridor where the HOV lane is being proposed, and therefore you would identify the increase in transit ridership as well as the travel time improvement for transit riders, I could see how that project would be in line with this proposal. But it would have to be an enhancement to the transit service. And I might ask you to go back and ask me the second question again.
Yes, so he asked, what specific performance measures will you be looking for on a project where ITS elements are utilized, such as transit signal priority devices, to improve bus travel times on a managed lanes project, which induces additional VMT?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I think it's going to be a bit difficult to answer without having the performance metrics in front of me. But I know that we do, we do assess throughput and transit throughput. And ultimately, if we're presented that, managed lane is going to, obviously increase potential lane width or capacity, which induces demand, but we're also presented with numbers that transit travel time is decreasing considerably due to access to this managed lane. I unfortunately not going to be able to give you the specific metric that we would be looking at, but we will be presenting more thoroughly on the performance metrics guidebook in an upcoming workshop. I know we say that a lot, but we're working on a lot, and I can assure you that we can identify those metrics, or they're already identified likely in the guidelines. It's just not coming to me. So I apologize.
One more comment, and then it looks like we do have another hand raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste after this. Okay. This is from Julia Randolph. Julia Randolph with the Coalition for Clean Air. We agree with Nicole from Climate Plan about making sure to include community support. Also, we think it is key to add pro-housing elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
All right, so our next hand up is Gracia Elenis.
Hi, I hope I unmuted myself. Good afternoon, everyone. Gracia Elenis. I work for Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. I had a couple of comments that I just hopefully will try to make it quick. So for the first one, option A, I did want to make a comment around the generating revenue and making sure that we are generating revenue in an equitable ways to make sure, just like already disproportionate populations are not, bearing that brunt of that revenue generating impact. The other one is for the option C. I would like to recommend that we include language in here around so it says describe how the project's expected benefits are supported by local land use policies, and my recommendations is to also include and complying with affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is a new state compliance that requires all local agencies and state agencies to comply with. So would love to see that, which kind of also brings me to my next point on that same option C is the language of pro-housing designation is just, I want to recognize the fact that pro-housing designation does not necessarily address the disparate impacts that a lot of BIPOC communities have faced. Just because a designation does have pro-housing policies does not necessarily mean that it is addressing also, past, policies that created segregated communities, that created environmental justice communities. And so I would like us to go further in thinking beyond that of just like and I think adding the language of affirmatively furthering fair housing would address that. And I think one last comment is also just to I'm not sure how this can be addressed in option C, but just keeping in mind the fact that sometimes especially in the valley and in the inland regions where we do have, there's more land, there are new communities that continue to pop up. And so, congestion is being created because of these communities. And so I think it's just very easy to say, okay, we're creating we're pro-housing because we're building housing kind of thing, and we need help for this. But in all intents and purposes, this is exclusionary housing that is primarily, market rate, single family type of housing. So how do we address that in option C, and making sure that we're not supporting projects that are facilitating and further, straying from our goal in AB 686?
Very, very valid comments, Christy, and I appreciate it. I don't think you're warranting a response, or not warranting, but asking for a response is what I should say. So we will consider what you're saying about option C. I will assure you that we can have the same exact conversation in an existing evaluation criteria. So we're proposing option C as an example or as a possibility. So the inclusion of the language in option C is meant for discussion, and that's exactly what we're having. But when we get to the conversation in our November workshop on November 18th, where we are actually talking about the existing efficient land use criteria, I think your comments are going to be very appropriate, and hopefully you're able to attend. If you're not able to attend in that workshop, we will be happy to take your comments. We're taking them now, but happy to take your comments for consideration in how we evolve the efficient land use criteria. But just to acknowledge that we hear what you're saying, and I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. I think we have one more hand raised. Teresa Favila.
I know her.
I just wanted to respond real quick on an earlier comment regarding the conversion of general purpose lanes.
Yes, thank you, Teresa.
Yes.
Teresa, I just want to let everyone know who's not familiar with you. Hopefully everyone's familiar with you. Teresa Favila is our Deputy Director of programming, but used to oversee the Solutions for Congested Corridors program back in cycle 1 and in the creation of the cycle 2 guidelines. So Teresa, thank you for chiming in.
Yes, so we have limitations, statutory limitations on the conversion of general purpose lanes to toll lanes. There are certain limitations on others, but it's prohibited to change general purpose lanes to hot lanes. They could be converted to HOV lanes, and those are statutory requirements. So we're limited as to what we can do in terms of conversion of those lanes.
Teresa, now this is just from my knowledge, we could have a conversation after this. I know where you sit. Have we received applications requesting to do that yet?
We have not. We have received applications where the footprint cannot change of general purpose lanes. Okay. So that's the main thing. It cannot change. And so we also are very cautious, although it's statutorily allowed to change general purpose lanes to HOV lanes, that creates a different type of a concern with community, because so although it is allowed, a lot of times it may be very difficult to do so.
Okay. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you. Good job, Matthew.
Thank you, Teresa. And actually, Teresa said something that reminded me of a comment that Gracia made on option A, which please, I wanted to respond to this. We had a very robust conversation about the equity of tolling lanes and at our last commission meeting. And so that is something that will be continue to be considered, you know, moving forward. I didn't want to skirt that comment. That's an important comment as well. I'll turn it back over to you, Kayla and Celeste, if we have additional comments.
Thanks, Matthew. Go ahead, Celeste. It looks like we have a hand up.
Yeah, we have Mike Woodman. Looks like he might be wanting to comment back. Okay, Mike.
Hey, Matthew. This is Mike Woodman again with the North State Super Region. For strategy C, the language there, you know, I could see some rural projects that are through like a congested Main Street, where there could have applicability with some of the language there, but then other rural projects, you know, on a rural highway corridor that's congested with, you know, limited growth in that corridor, but you have congestion and you're looking to do a truck climbing lane with the topography, you know, the applicability there. I just want to make sure, you know, and we'll look at this closely and work with you guys, but just want to make sure we're considering these type of things and making sure we're not disadvantaging certain projects that are eligible in the program.
Of course. Thank you, Mike.
Just a comment.
I appreciate it.
Hi, Matthew. It's Kayla. We do have one more written comment that came in.
Okay.
From Sarkis Kachek from Santa Barbara County Association of Governments. Thank you, CTC staff, for providing various options. SB CAG supports option A as it identifies multimodal solutions that can be implemented in multimodal corridors with transit, rail, active transportation, and HOV solutions that improve transit travel times and reliability.
Okay. Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, Sarkis, for the comment. I'm not seeing the little signal that's telling me there are hands raised. I cannot tell if we have additional comments. So, Kayla, are you giving me the go-ahead to proceed?
Yep, go ahead, Matthew. We're good.
Okay. I just really quickly, before we move on to the next slide, and before I turn it over to my colleague Naveen Habib, I want to thank our attendees for this discussion. I do want to apologize for not presenting this information before this workshop. So I do understand I'm likely catching some of you off guard with these options that you're potentially reading through and trying to formulate thoughts on the fly. But I was interested in some, you know, initial reactions to the language. And as I mentioned, we will be continuing to consider any comments or feedback that we receive. You know, if you are interested in sending us an email or giving Naveen or I a call to chat about this in the lead up to our November workshop. But we'll also be considering everything that we just talked about in this workshop. And I will make the commitment to post our proposals or a single proposal, if that's where we land, for this strategy in advance of the November 18th workshop, so that hopefully our stakeholders have a little bit more time to chew on this. So with that, I appreciate the dialogue. I'm going to hand it back over to Naveen Habib.
Thanks, Matthew. Wow, that was a really great, robust discussion there. In line with that, I just wanted to remind everybody that we are here to discuss everything with you. I noticed a lot of people were trying to rush through their comments or apologizing in the comment section for having too many comments. This is why we're here. So please don't feel like you have to apologize. You're not interrupting anything. We're here to offer a free-form discussion with all of you and get your feedback and your insights. So please hit us up with all the comments and questions you've got as we go through our presentation. Alrighty, so if we're already on funding restrictions. Great, thank you, Kayla. So if you would like to follow along, section 7 about funding restrictions can be found on page 3 of the 2020 SCCP guidelines. As a reminder, those are attached in the handout section on the right navigational panel, where you are usually sending your questions and comments. So the most critical information to note here is that the program only funds the construction component of a capital project. In addition, program funds shall not supplant other committed funds. For example, this means that if a local agency committed $5 million to a project and is then selected to receive $10 million in SCCP funds, the agency may not use the SCCP funds to replace the $5 million in local funding. That's what we mean when we say you can't supplant other committed funds. And in addition, SCCP will not participate in any cost increases to any project. I think Matthew sort of covered this earlier as well. Any cost increases must be funded from other fund sources. Funds will not be allocated to any portion of a project until all modes of the project have completed the environmental process in accordance with the CEQA, and if the project is federalized, the NEPA. Currently, environmental clearance must be completed within 6 months of program adoption. However, in subsequent workshops, we will discuss the idea to require CEQA NEPA clearance before program adoption. We discussed this a little bit in our September workshop as well, as I mentioned before, but don't worry if you're not, we will have a future discussion on this in an upcoming workshop. Projects on the state highway system and/or projects implemented by Caltrans require a Caltrans approved project report. And finally, the Commission intends to fund multiple projects throughout the state, with at least one project in a county with a population of 500,000 or less. At this time, we are not proposing changes to funding restrictions other than the CEQA and NEPA requirement that I already addressed, which we will revisit formally in a future workshop. With that, that closes out the funding restrictions portion. Kayla, are there any questions or comments at this time regarding this item?
Hi, Naveen. Yeah, we do have a hand raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Okay.
Thanks, Kayla. Our first comment is Julia Randolph.
Hi, Julia Randolph with the Coalition for Clean Air. I am trying to read this and comprehend my comments at the same time, but from how I'm reading this, I feel like this would limit a lot the types of projects that could apply because of how far they are down. You know, a lot of the CAPDI type projects are only so far down the pipeline. You know, like a lot of the projects that are already like gone through all of the environmental stuff that they need, you know, and not just the environmental stuff, just, you know, the background stuff that they need to go through are mostly highway projects, and that's what we've seen. So I just, you know, I think this is limiting, and I'm wondering if there's a way, you know, maybe I'm reading it not right now, but if there's a way to, you know, restrict this to like highway widening projects, or, you know, just so that we're giving the projects, you know, the CAPDI type projects a fighting chance of getting this funding.
So Julia, is your comment in relation to the CEQA and NEPA issue that I just mentioned?
Yes.
Okay. So we addressed this at the last workshop. Thank you again for your comment. It's a good comment, and we addressed part of this in the workshop in September, and we do plan to discuss this in more detail, but I did want to offer a little bit of background to folks here. So this is something that we allowed in cycles 1 and 2. We allowed projects to apply for funding requiring clearance within 6 months of program adoption. We're considering requiring this before, primarily due to addressing a concern from Commissioner Liu. If we commit money to a project without knowing the environmental concerns, we may inadvertently be incentivizing projects before any alternatives have been explored or vetted for these projects. And then projects must be delivered as provided in the project applications for SCCP funds. The main concern, I understand, is related to mostly on NEPA, not particularly CEQA, CEQA, I just combined them together. The main concerns, it seems, are related to NEPA, and I think from what you were saying, that kind of falls into that category as well, that if a project receives federal funding, NEPA is required. If we require NEPA before program adoption, we may leave a lot of regional projects off the table for funding potentially, which I think is the issue that you are raising as well. We do plan to have a larger discussion around this issue to really understand where everybody is coming from. I don't know if Matthew has anything in addition to add. I'm sorry that I don't have more details on this particular item yet.
Okay, but I would like to, Matthew loves to, great to see you, but would like to say that I know exactly what comments you're talking about from Commissioner Liu, and I know that he had a conversation with staff that was supposed, only related to highway widening because he was because of this exact problem. And so, that's a little bit what my concern was that, I thought that part was addressed, and it seems here that all the conversation that we just had for an hour, like, doesn't really matter if, those types of projects, because those projects are just not that far down the pipeline.
Of course, Julia. So let's do this. I have not yet heard the suggestion to, and if I did, forgive me for it not coming to me, but I have not yet heard the suggestion to require CEQA NEPA for, at program adoption for specific types of projects and allow a different requirement for other types of projects. I have heard that a lot of the CAPTI oriented projects or projects that are aligned with CAPTI are not as far along in the process. And so that is a concern that has been communicated to us, and we're aware of it, and I'm happy to continue having the conversation about that. I will point out that the language that you see here, also considering that the construction phase is the only eligible phase for funding in this program, unlike the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, which does fund pre-construction. We're still looking at, a program period or a program length, right? So if we have 2 years of funding and we have projects that are not through environmental by program adoption, that means that they are asserting to us that, within a 2 year period, they will complete environmental, if we keep it open, complete environmental, complete design, complete right-of-way acquisition if it's necessary, as well as be ready to list. So that is a lot of project development to prepare for construction within a 2 year program period if we continue with the 2 year program period. If we extend the length of the program period, which I know we're going to get open up for discussion on today's workshop as well, then that could be a different story. It might not change. It might not change the outcome, but all to say that we hear you, Julia, and we know we are absolutely not trying to prohibit innovative projects that, quite frankly, have just started to be considered or have just started to receive funding through planning phases. We don't want to prohibit them, obviously not outright prohibit them, but prevent them, I suppose, from being eligible for funding because they don't meet the time restrictions. But for a 2 year program period, we are looking for projects that are ready to go. And I think that's implied by projects have to be ready to allocate funding, which means they're ready to award contracts. Otherwise, we can consider them for future program periods.
Okay, I'd still like to keep this conversation open, around that, just because while a lot of highway projects can take a long time to go through all of these, the CEQA and NEPA and everything, some of the active transportation and transit type projects could be deployed faster.
Okay.
Transit's not just big, it could be electric buses and, from there.
So Julia, if understanding, and we absolutely are considering this conversation ongoing, would your suggestion be to keep the 6-month provision then? If we wanted to take away maybe like what your comment is today, understanding we'll continue talking about it, would your request or recommendation be to allow for the 6-month period from program adoption to complete environmental, even for the transit projects that you highlight or the active transportation projects that you highlight?
I'm sorry, I think I'm misunderstanding what you're asking me, exactly what you would take out.
Are you suggesting that we don't change anything on this slide? Because this slide is pulled directly from the existing guidelines.
I'm suggesting that we, at least make a provision that if you are going to do that, that should only, apply to highway widening projects.
Okay. If we were, okay. Understood.
That is still, because I think that was the essence of Commissioner Liu's comment, was we shouldn't be, funding pre-construction on highway widening projects that are just going to increase VMT and emissions in urban areas and other places. So, Commissioner Liu's comment is still valid, but I think that there may need to be some specification, and if that's not possible, then yeah, we'll work it out. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Julia. I do really appreciate the comments. Naveen, I'm gonna give it back to you. I'm trying to look at myself as little as possible on this workshop.
No, I like having you here, Matthew. Don't go anywhere. I think, Kayla, we've received a few written comments, but do we have any other hands raised?
Hi, Naveen. Yeah, we have one more hand raised, Patricia Chen. Patricia, I've unmuted you. There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just wanted to thank all of you for allowing us to continue this conversation on something that's, really important to some of the applicant agencies. And I was listening in to something that Matthew said about wanting to have ready to go projects and about the time period and a lot of development activities to complete before construction funding is programmed. And I just wanted to offer one comment in that area. LA Metro does use design build for many of our transit projects, most actually. And this can actually include right-of-way activities occurring at the time that final design is occurring as well, which means it just means that there are less activities that are that have to be done before the construction allocation actually occurs. So that is one point, and leading to my overall point, which is I think that from our point of view, the way it was last cycle was I thought it was good. We were apprehensive about it originally because it was a little bit tighter than the sort of the status quo before that. But I think it did work out rather well to be able to be there as long as we had the draft EIR, which I think goes a long way in terms of project readiness and project description, and having a reliable, really knowing what the project is and what it's going to do. It's not going to change much between draft environmental clearance and then the actual final clearance. So I thought the 6-month allowance was really appropriate and worked really well. And I would like to see it continue. I've heard a lot of good rationales from some of the other project applicants, and so I appreciate being able to speak for that at this time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Patricia. I think we have more hands raised.
Yes, one more. Yeah, Angel Ply. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Angel Pyle, I apologize. Angel, looks like you're self-muted. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Angel.
Yeah, we can hear you, Angel. You still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Sorry for the audio troubles. So just a couple of things. I did write a comment into the chat because I was having issues with my microphone, but we'd like to encourage the commission to keep the current guideline provisions with specific to the environmental processes, and keep the deadlines as they are to allow more projects to be developed which are in alignment with CAPTI. I've also voiced this during the trade corridor workshops too, so I look forward to having it discussed at a future workshop. The second item is that we'd also like to encourage the commission for the very same reasons to potentially allow for pre-construction funded phases within the congested corridor program, as some agencies have, including Caltrans, have limited access to pre-construction funds, and this would further enable the department to develop projects that are more in alignment with CAPTI. So anyway, appreciate the consideration. Don't know if you guys want to talk about that today or not, or at a future workshop, but just wanted to mention it here just for consideration. So thank you.
Thank you, Angel.
I can't help myself.
I was just going to ask you if you had a comment, Matthew.
Thank you for the comments, Angel. So this is the first suggestion we're hearing to allow for funding pre-construction in this program. And I'm honestly curious what other stakeholders might feel about that. And I'm just going to give a bit of an anecdote from working on this program the last 2 cycles. And again, if we're approached with a 2-year program period again, you know, we've been oversubscribed in this program for a couple of cycles now. And in the first cycle, we had a program period of 4 years with $1 billion. In the second program period, we had a $500 million funding capacity, and we received requests in excess of $1.3 billion. And these are all shovel-ready requests for construction. And so I'm not saying that we are not open to considering funding pre-construction, but we do not want to, you know, prevent projects that are ready to seek construction from, you know, having an opportunity to compete. And over a 2-year program period, there may be projects that, and not just, you know, on-system projects, but other, you know, alternate modal projects that would be seeking construction and you know, potentially competing against projects that are, you know, trying to get there. And so obviously funding pre-construction is vitally important, and you know, we know that there are limited resources out there to fund pre-construction, but there are resources out there to fund pre-construction as well. So you know, this was something that we weren't planning on discussing today, quite frankly, because we weren't proposing to change it. However, as our workshops go, we are always happy to take suggestions on changing the status quo. So I don't anticipate that we'll close the door on this now, but if, you know, I'll invite other comments or other questions or thoughts on whether or not this program should consider pre-construction. And that's not to say that, you know, that we'll be able to consider that, but I'm certainly certainly interested in hearing what stakeholders think. But I know that I'm inviting questions about something different, and I'm sure we had hands raised and comments written regarding other things. So now this is starting to feel like a real workshop. So we'll go out of order. We'll handle any comments that we receive.
Celeste, I see the hand raise is still up. Do we have any more comments and with people who want to come online and share them before we move to written comments?
Okay, yeah, we have 2 more hand raised, so I can go ahead and unmute Janelle Jablonski first.
Thank you.
Looks like there she is.
No, yeah, I thought I lowered my hand, but yeah, I just have a question. So on that sentence, that one, a project may be considered for funding at the time of adoption if it has completed the final draft. So meaning, if I have a project, I finish my draft environmental document in December 22, and then I'm gonna be finishing the final PR in December 23, then we're still eligible to apply, right? Is that when I look at the timing, I thought it is. So does that can you answer that? I guess I just want to make sure that you know, we won't have the final PR until December 23, but if we have the draft prior to that, we can still apply for this SCCP.
The answer, Naveen, yes, you can still apply, but we, you know, depending on where we land with CEQA NEPA clearance, maybe it would be a good idea to have a separate conversation so we can understand the progress that has been made on your project. And, you know, you can give us the specific example at that time. But I mean, you know, wouldn't want to tell you right now that it's not eligible to apply without having a better understanding of what you're referring to.
Okay, all right, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think there was one more hand raised, Celeste.
Yes. Next up, we have Carter Rubin.
Hey everyone, this is Carter Rubin from the Natural Resources Defense Council. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all today, and I think we're really excited that CAPTI creates lots of opportunities here to have conversations about these, you know, programs and how they align with our climate goals. I just wanted to chime in because I thought Julia's observation really resonated with me, and I'll just sort of give a +1 to that and maybe offer my own take, which is, you know, for 80 years or so, our state transportation policy has been, you know, to widen highways and facilitate more VMT. And then, you know, starting around 10 years ago, we started shifting that. But I think it's safe to say we have this like overhang of highway expansion projects that are, you know, more ready than the types of projects we need to shift to be building. So maybe one food for thought would be, you know, we need to play catch up a bit with projects that reduce VMT and greenhouse gas emissions, and they may not be as far along in their environmental process. So perhaps funding those types of VMT reducing projects at earlier stages of their readiness would be helpful in kind of helping them catch up to the point where we have, to where a lot of the highway projects are, which is that they've been on the books for so long that they're more shovel ready. So I'll stop there, and thank you again for the opportunity to chat with you all today.
Thanks, Carter. Do we still have any hands raised?
Yes, so next up is Peter DeHaan, but it looks like he will need to enter in his PIN. So in the meantime, I'll let him set up his PIN. Let's have Mike Woodman.
Hey, Matthew, this is Mike Woodman again with the North State Super Region. One thing I would just point out is with this program, it's important to note for some of our stakeholders, and Matthew, correct me if I misstate this, but capacity increasing projects aren't eligible for this program. The projects have to be, you can't just widen capacity and add lanes onto the highway. Not eligible for this program. I support the doing the construction phases of these projects. I'm concerned with the fact how oversubscribed the program is. Shifting to pre-construction activities. When we have projects that are shovel ready, if we delay those projects, until the next cycle, those project costs increase significantly. When we have shovel-ready projects, we need to be able to deliver those benefits to these congested corridors and make the best use of the taxpayer dollars. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the comment, and forgive me if I misheard you or misunderstanding, but I think you said you're asking for me to confirm whether or not capacity increasing projects are eligible, or you were stating that they are not eligible. And actually, HOV lanes or managed lanes or express lanes are eligible for this program and are not required to be built on existing lanes. So in a sense, capacity increasing projects are eligible, but general purpose lanes are not eligible. So I don't know if I misheard you, and maybe I'm just restating exactly what you said, but I can't be too careful. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah, no, that's the clarification. I just wanted to make sure folks didn't think that general purpose lane capacity projects were eligible in this program.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, so it looks like Peter DeHaan was able to enter in his PIN. So Peter?
Yes, hello everyone. Peter DeHaan from the Ventura County Transportation Commission. And I just wanted to say, at the last workshop, I had made a comment about, in terms of the timing of the environmental clearance having to do with a multimodal corridor plan and a suite of smaller projects, and the logistical difficulties of getting all those projects moved through the environmental clearance in time. And I'm just wanting to acknowledge that I think I was talking about the same issue that we're hearing about this time regarding the timing of projects that address cap-tie. I was just basically coming at it from a different angle, because that's a lot of what we're talking about in a multimodal corridor plan, is maybe a suite, instead of one big project, a suite of several smaller projects, which would be multimodal, and the type of project, a good share of it being the type of projects that would that we're talking about, active transportation and transit projects. And so what was talked about this time, I think, was addressing my issue as well, as just having dealing with multiple smaller projects rather than one big project.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate I appreciate kind of adding your past comment to the context of this conversation, and it's we hear loud and clear that it is very important concept that needs to be considered. And I can assure you, we will be taking that back and presenting our proposal in an upcoming workshop, which everyone will have an opportunity to continue to engage us during.
All right, one more. Janelle Jablonski.
Oh. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. My hand, it keeps showing down. So no, I didn't have any question. Thank you.
Not a problem. That is it for the raised hands.
Okay, Kayla, do we want to go over some of the comments that may not have been addressed by the verbal comments?
Hi, Naveen. Yes, many of our written commenters already raised their hands, so we actually just have one question left. This is from Steve Bertelbow. It is becoming more widely understood that widening of roads usually increases VMT and doesn't reduce congestion. Where does this appear in the guidelines?
Stephen, that's a kind of a tough question to answer. You know, and I think that the CAPTI itself points in that direction, and we are building off the strategies that are noted for this program. However, the Solutions for Congested Corridors framing statute does not require that projects are VMT reducing. It goes back to the objective that Naveen highlighted at the start of this presentation. So I would say we hear you loud and clear, and we understand that there's a desire to see projects in this program that are those that are, you know, looking to reduce VMT, and we are taking that on, you know, through the CAPTI strategy 1.1 that has been suggested and read by commission adoption, adopted resolution to take that on. So that's what we presented a bit earlier.
That's it for written comments and questions, Naveen and Matthew, and it looks like we don't have any more hands raised.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Kayla and Celeste. I think we can move on to the next slide then, if there are no other questions. Okay, so moving on to eligibility criteria, section 9 about eligible applicants can be found on page 4 of the 2020 SCCP guidelines. Again, the handout is included under the handouts tab on your right navigational panel. Per the Senate Bill 1 statute, regional transportation agencies, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans may nominate projects for SCCP funding if the projects are consistent with the policy objectives of this program. At most, 1/2 of available funding each year can be awarded to projects nominated exclusively by Caltrans. Collaboration between regional agencies and Caltrans is encouraged, and it is expected when it comes to on-system projects. These are projects that are on the state highway system. Any jointly nominated projects by multiple eligible applicants will be prioritized. However, agencies will maintain accountability for the project and the use and expenditure of program funds. At this time, there are no changes proposed for this section. It's straight out of the statute. So I will pause here again for any questions or comments. Kayla or Celeste, do you see any?
Hi, Naveen. No questions or comments or raised hands right now.
Awesome. Okay, well, we can move on to the next slide then. This is eligible projects, which is in section 10 and can be found on pages 4 to 6 of the 2020 SCCP guidelines. Transformative projects designed to reduce congestion in highly traveled and highly congested corridors through performance improvements that balance transportation improvements, community impacts, and provide environmental benefits are eligible for SCCP funding. I don't think I see any questions or comments, so we can move on to the next slide, which just continues. Oh, wait, I think somebody raised a hand.
Yes. Rayan Monteshemi, I'm so sorry. You've been unmuted. They are self-muted. Maybe it was accidental.
Hi, can you hear me now? Just
Yes.
found the mute button. Okay, thank you so much. My question is, and perhaps this should be asked for the next slide, but I'll just ask it now.
Okay.
Similar to the language about the eligibility of bus and rail vehicles that increase transit service, please clarify in the guidelines the eligibility of ferry vessels which provide comparable levels of congestion relief on parallel corridors.
Did you just say ferry vessels?
Yes, ferry vessels.
Okay. All right, we'll note that comment. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
I will move on to the next slide. Okay, so these types of projects include, but are not limited to, projects that make safety improvements, create pedestrian facilities, add high occupancy vehicle lanes and managed lanes, add new or improve existing transit infrastructure, add new or improve existing rail infrastructure, create transit hubs for multimodal transportation, or acquire zero emission buses and the cleanest available rail cars, locomotives, or other rolling stock, amongst a host of other eligible projects. So there is one critical reminder here. Matthew, I think, has mentioned this several times as of now, but I will say it one more time. General purpose lanes are not eligible for SCCP funding, nor are projects on railroad corridors that do not serve passenger rail. If we can move on to the next slide, we will address a proposed change. So we do have a proposed change to Section 10. The idea is to be more considerate of technology-based and/or technology-inclusive projects to future-proof SCCP-funded projects and project segments. This can be accomplished by clarifying existing language to factor in performance optimization measures of SCCP-funded equipment without requiring additional justification from agencies. The optimization phase may be part of a singular or separate contract from design and build for post-implementation optimization. This critical period helps to ensure the installed equipment is functioning as intended and to make any necessary adjustments, thereby protecting the investment longer term. If we can move on to the next slide, you will see that we have laid out the current and proposed language in the same place so that you may review it conveniently. The new proposed language is more inclusive, as it states, projects that employ advanced and innovative technology, including but not limited to intelligent transportation systems, also known as ITS, digital signage, wayfinding systems, real-time travel information devices, and identified ongoing performance and optimization to support those investments. We understand that this is a change that may have been addressed before we even started our workshops. So at this time, we would like to hear your thoughts on this proposed change. Kayla, are there any questions or comments at this time regarding this change or the language itself?
Hi, Naveen. I'm not seeing any written questions yet, and it looks like we do have one hand raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Thank you. Okay, Kathy Studwell.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm with the City of San Francisco. We have a very aged train light rail system that goes through a subway. We have a very outdated train control system, and we need to install a communication-based train control system, not only for the trains that go through the subway, but for the ones that go out on the street lines. And this is obviously technology that will improve optimization, on-time performance, and enable additional capacity. I know that you funded such a project for BART. I just need to get concurrence that that is an eligible project.
Unless Matthew feels differently based off what we just discussed now, I believe that it would be.
I apologize. I will say anytime we're asked about a particular project, that an applicant has in mind, I would like to have a separate conversation and make sure that we have the full extent of the detail, so that we're not providing you with anything that you might take away from this conversation and might send an unclear message to other stakeholders on the workshop. So if you wouldn't mind reaching out to us, we can set up some time to chat about your project, and then resulting from our conversation and determining if it's an eligible project or not, we'll return to this group and report back what we find.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
No, thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that, Matthew. You are right. I don't see any other comments or questions, but I'll ask Kayla or Celeste to chime in if they do see something.
Hi, Naveen. This is Kayla. We do have a couple of comments that were written in. So these are from Paul Krupka. He supports the proposed technology language. And then he said, I think there is a subject missing in the last phrase of proposed language. Identified ongoing performance and optimization systems or devices or thanks.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for mentioning that. We will definitely take a look and come back if we do add it. We'll make an update if necessary. Thank you. Any other comments or questions or thoughts about the proposed language?
That's it for now, Naveen. I'm not seeing any other hands raised either.
Okay, great. So I think we can move on to the next slide then. Okay, so since its inception, SCCP has programmed 2 funding cycles. The first cycle is known as the 2018 program and covered 4 years of programming with $1 billion in SCCP funds. This program included fiscal years 2017 to 2018, 2018 to 2019, 2019 to 2020, and 2020 to 21. The current cycle is the second cycle, known as the 2020 program, which covers 2 years of programming with $500 million in SCCP funds. This program includes fiscal years 2021-22 and 2022-23. Next slide. Forgot the word for slide for a second. Thank you. So for this upcoming third cycle, known as the 2022 program, we are recommending a 2-year program period, but are highlighting additional options for discussion purposes. Here is what the different program lengths would entail. So the 2-year program would be with $500 million in SCCP funds, which would include fiscal years 2023-24 and 2024-25. The 3-year program with $750 million in SCCP funds, which would include fiscal years 2023-24, 2024-25, and 2025-26. And then finally, the 4-year program with $1 billion in SCCP funds, which would include fiscal years 2023-24, 2024-25, 2025-26, and 2026-27. As the immediate past cycle, cycle 2, was a 2-year cycle, we are considering what worked and what could be improved for the upcoming cycle. Essentially the pluses and deltas of a 2-year cycle. We would also like to hear your thoughts on this matter, so please do share with us what you liked about the 2-year cycle and what you think could be improved for the upcoming cycle based on the information I just provided. Kayla, any questions or comments, or Celeste?
Hi, Naveen. We do have a written question, but I see that Patricia's hand is raised, so I'm going to turn it over to Celeste so that she can handle the hands raised right now.
Thanks, Kayla. First up is Patricia Chen.
I think that was by mistake. My hand should be down, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so next up is, Kenneth, but I accidentally put your hand down. Kenneth, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Kenneth Cow.
Hi. Hi, thank you. This is Kenneth Cow with MTC. Thanks for taking my comment. I wanted to support your recommendation to keep it a 2-year cycle like we had in cycle 2. I think, I like that we timed it with some of the other funding cycles, including ATP and the STIP, which are also updated every 2 years. I realize that 4 years means that we have more money to program, which is great, but that also means that if you don't get funded, you have to wait 4 years. So I personally like the 2-year cycle. And I would also like to make the plug to have this be decided relatively soon. As you know, Caltrans is working on the nominations, which are due to headquarters in February. That also means we'll have to work with our district between now and January to finalize those projects. And depending on which 2, 3, 4-year cycle is adopted, that will influence which projects will be proposed to Caltrans and to the regional agencies. So any kind of direction that we can provide on the program cycle, sooner rather than later, I think will be really helpful for us to decide which projects we'll move forward with for nomination. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comments? I see raised hands.
Yes, there's 2 more raised hands. Next up is Jess Avila.
Okay.
Yes, I'd like to know what the logic is, proposing these different number of years per cycle. Is it that you could award larger projects if we do 4-year cycle? Is that the logic here?
I'm gonna punt this one to Matthew, but I think
I can speak to it. That's part of the logic, right? Having a $1 billion, of available funding offers a lot more opportunities both to applicants as well as to the commissioners when they adopt the next program. But I'll also say in this program in particular, the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, and as we've heard a lot of commenters to this point state, really is looking for multimodal approaches to congestion. And sometimes when we receive requests for funding, and we received and recommended 2 projects that come to the top of my mind in cycle 2, which contain several components and several different modes that they were approaching congestion along a corridor. And sometimes those types of projects require funding in different years, and sometimes those types of projects require funding in more than 2 years. And so understanding that we have a very large audience, and kind of to Kenny's point, that this is something to know sooner than later, we're not, so, and just for the record, Naveen said this, we are proposing a 2-year program worth $500 million for cycle 3. But we would not be good stewards of this funding unless we understood that if there were stakeholders that wanted to consider something of greater length. And so it's not that that the commission is interested in programming $1 billion at once. It's that this program does call for potentially large scale projects, large monetary value projects. And our first cycle was a $1 billion 4-year program. And we saw a lot of very large projects awarded funds and seem to be successfully delivered in that cycle. So really, it's just making sure we're doing due diligence to engage with our stakeholders through this process when the decision is being made.
Well, can I ask a follow-up then? If we were to go with a 4-year, right, and as far as there's been some conversation about getting PNED within 6 months of program adoption. In this event, if we went 4 years, then would there be an open discussion of maybe having 6 months, maybe 9 months to having that completed? Because you'll have additional time there to start your project, if you will. So is that something that you would be open to?
I can say that if we all of a sudden started receiving a lot of support to extend the program period we would have to take that back for consideration, right? When we were considering that, I think we would also have to consider whether or not the timeliness of CEQA NEPA, at program adoption or allowing 6 months is also an appropriate time frame. So to answer your question without giving you a yes or no, I can say yes, I think we would consider the ramifications of requiring environmental clearance earlier in a 4-year program period.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we have 2 more hands. Next up is Sarkis Kachek.
Sorry, can you hear me? Okay, thank you, Naveen. This is Sarkis Kachek, Santa Barbara County Association of Governments. I did have one question, and then I was gonna express support for an option, but today we're talking about the Congested Corridors program, and I know that there's probably discussion related to local partnership and the freight programming periods within those individual workshops. So I was wondering, are we going to have a discussion about the programming cycles in those workshops too? Or is commission staff considering maybe like just a general workshop to talk about maybe some themes that are similar to all the programs? But related to the programming options, we would support the 4-year option for a couple reasons. One being what Matthew talked about transformative projects and having multiple multimodal elements to them. SB1 was meant to be transformative in the amount of new revenue it was providing. And so these programs are transformative in their own respect. So being able to fund transformative projects hopefully is something that we can strive for. And then the other comment for support for 4 years is the State Transportation Improvement Program goes on a 4-year cycle. So we would like to see if these programs could go towards those kind of 4-year cycles too, at least for congested corridors. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarkis.
Okay, next up is Teresa Favila.
It is me again, and I think Sarkis just made my introduction. So just as a reminder, one of the things that the STIP is used for is to leverage the funding, and I guess I am being a little bit selfish on the STIP, but it is creating a disconnect because the funding years are so different than the STIP. So not that I'm advocating for a 4-year program or a 2-year program, but it is becoming more challenging because they're so they're not in sync. By having a 4-year program, you would put both programs in the same cycle, and then after that, every 2 years, just because the STIP, the funding for the new STIP is always in the last 2 years of the STIP. So for this STIP is always going to be 25, 26, 26, 27. So a 2-year program will be out of range altogether for new funding, and we're having to advance, and sometimes capacity limits us. So now we have to go into other creative ways to be able to allocate to the project. Just pitching a little bit there, just thinking the programs could possibly make sense. So just a thought there.
Thank you, Teresa. And this is one of the reasons I really miss our in-person workshops, because you probably would have kicked me under the table to remind me that the STIP rationale is a very large rationale for considering a 4-year program. But the main reason I came off mute was to go back to Sarkis's comment on whether or not this is being considered in the other programs, and I'm assuming you're referencing local partnership program, the competitive local partnership program, and the trade corridor enhancement program. And yeah, we will be fleshing out this the program period and the length of the programs in those two programs as well. So the conversation is not siloed just for this program, but it's something that, you know, every cycle iteration, we want to make sure that, you know, the program period length is appropriate. And we do understand that for the three programs together, you know, there should be some coincidence. So thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Circus, for your comments.
Okay, we received 3 additional hand raised. So next up is Stephen Hanamake. I'm so sorry, but I've unmuted you.
No, you've done well. Stephen Hanamaikai with San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, SOCOG. I don't know that we necessarily have an opinion on a 2 or 4 year cycle, but maybe if you are thinking about the 4 year cycle and kind of understanding the challenges of awarding projects that maybe haven't gone through PAD and maybe those are falling out in the outer years, but perhaps considering a contingency list. So if a project is not able to meet that, I don't know, 6-month, 9-month timeline for achieving PAD after adoption, that projects might be moved up above that cut line. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Stephen.
All right, next up is Patricia Chen.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, we wanted to add our support for the 2-year program. It is a 2-year program by statute. And I think as far as the transformative projects, that I would rather see in order to get a transformative program, I would rather see more funding added to the program rather than to have to reach out into future years, because you kind of have the opposite of transformation in the 2 or 4 years that you're waiting to be able to program. Again, once you've, you know, brought that funding forward, you make a big gap. So you would have a lot of really deserving projects waiting until there's funding available again. And then I wanted to also point one thing out real quick about the opportunities for matching the STIP with the SB1 programs, particularly with the SCCP. SCCP is about congestion. I think that many of the counties that have really serious congestion programs tend to have a sales tax as well, so that they have matching funds available and don't have to match it up to the STIP to be able to participate. So just leave those things for your consideration, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
I came off because Patricia brings up a very good point, which I think we neglected to raise today. I know we've raised it in the past, but Patricia's absolutely correct. We are statutorily required to program the Solutions for Congested Corridors program or bring a program of projects every 2 years. And so if a 4-year cycle was determined, again, I'm not saying that it would be, there would have to be some, commitment made on the first 2 years of projects, and then there would be subsequent, projects over the latter 2 years that would be, submitted at origin or initial call for projects, and then, readopted 2 years in. But I like the suggestion, Patricia. I don't really know how we would achieve it, but the suggestion to provide, bring additional funding into Solutions for Congested Corridors. I'm not sure if that's what you were, if that's actually what you meant, but yeah, I don't know where we're going to get an augmentation for this program, but if we receive one, I can tell you the commission would be happy to take that on. So thanks for the suggestion. We support that.
Okay, we have 3 additional raise hands. Next up is Kenneth Cow.
Hi again, Kenneth Cow, MTC. I'm not opposed to a 4-year cycle either. I think you know, what Teresa brought up is a question that we have since we are working on the RTIPs and the STIPs right now, knowing that the funding is available in the last years and there is that mismatch. And if you know me, you know I like the hybrid approaches. So I was thinking about a hybrid, and I wonder if you guys, what you guys thought about it. Well, first, I definitely support Patricia's idea of if we can find more money, let's add it in here. I love that idea. But what if we did something similar to the ATP, where it's like, you know, it's a 4-year cycle for ATP, but then the funding is kind of halved, you know, if you will. So so like for this cycle, maybe we can have years 1 and year 2 be full 250, and then years 3 and 4 be like 125 each. So basically split it in half. And then 2 years later, we'll have 125, 125, 125, 125 in years 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think it's kind of like spreading that peanut butter a little thin in terms of the years, but it does spread it out a little bit more. We'll still be updating the program every 2 years, but for a 4-year cycle. So, you know, I'm just trying to figure out a way that we can balance that, you know, the STIP issue, along with the ideas that maybe some of the monies may be further out in terms of the project delivery cycle. That doesn't get to Sarkis's want of having a lot more money each cycle, but, you know, that might be a middle ground. So just want to see what people think about that.
Thanks, Kenneth. I think there is a similar comment to yours by Peter DeHaan in the written comments as well. It like almost exactly the same, I think. So I believe you do have some support in that suggestion.
All right, next up is Teresa Favila.
You know what? After hearing Kenny, I should have put my hand down, but I was going to say that. I go, why don't we look at the ATP model where it is a 4-year program? It is updated every 2 years. So that is food for thought. I'm going to be honest, I'm being selfish and just trying to align somehow the STIP. I know for a lot of agencies, the STIP is not a program that they would use, but for a lot of smaller agencies that are not self-help, the STIP, they're saving their STIP shares for a very large project. And so I would want to be able to accommodate them as much as we could. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Any other? Yes, there's 3 more.
Okay.
Next up is Patricia Chen.
Hi, okay. I was thinking if we were to have something like a 4-year, and I appreciate folks thinking out of the box and, you know, the ideas for hybrid to kind of have things work for multiple areas. I was thinking that probably if you're going to program that far out into the future, then we really ought to come back to the discussion of the deadline for the environmental, and perhaps also which components of which phases of the project are eligible. So in other words, if you have 4 years stretching out there, let's use that time as well as using that money, and let's make project development eligible, and let's not require all the project development to be done for a project to be awarded funds.
Thank you, Patricia. Anybody want to say anything in addition to that? I believe you said there's a couple more hands raised, right, Celeste?
Yes, 2 more. Next up is Sarkis.
Hi, Sarkis with SBCAG. I was just going to say that if we were going to create a California Transportation Programming Hall of Fame, I'd like to nominate Kenny Cow and Peter DeHaan as some of the first entrants for their hybrid option. Thank you.
We'll get right on that, Sarkis. That's a great suggestion.
All right, our last hand is Gus Corey.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Gus.
All right, thank you. Just a couple quick points. You know, maybe I have to go back and look at the statute myself, but you know, it says that the commission has to program the funds every 2 years. That's really no different from the SHOP and the STIP. And just a reminder, I mean, the funds are continuously appropriated, so there's predictability on the revenue coming in. So that's one point. I think vouching for the longer programming cycle allows us to accelerate delivery of these projects so that we can really maximize previous investments that were made, especially for the smaller counties that are really trying hard, even if with those that have sales tax measures. You know, the cost of these projects and what we generate through our sales tax measures is disproportionate to the need. And just as a reminder, I mean, we're trying to invest on the state highway system. That's a state asset. And I think we've seen the prevalence of fires, you know, what climate change is doing along the 101 corridor, along the 99, I mean, the supply chain demands. And so the sooner that we can kind of address and complete these corridors, I think it's to everybody's benefit to realize our ultimate goal of improving air quality and relieving congestion. So I would respectfully ask for your consideration to extend the programming cycle. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your well thought out comment, Gus. Really appreciate it. Anyone else want to add anything? Matthew, did you want to respond to anybody before we move on to written comments?
No, I like creative. I like when creative options are presented. I don't consider myself a very creative person. I have no Kenny and Peter to be creative individuals, so I'll second Sarkis's nomination to induct them into the Hall of Fame for funding 101. No, thank you everyone for the conversation. I think I'm happy we're having this now. Going back to an earlier comment, and forgive me for not recalling who made the comment. I think it was Kenny. We should have a decision on this soon, right? We understand that Caltrans is, you know, asking for regional priorities. I believe the deadline from Caltrans was extended to February 1st. And in order for our regions and our stakeholders to adequately prepare for what their own priorities might be, it's a good idea. It's a good thing to know what years and how much funding you have to work with. So I commit to revisiting this soon, or as soon as we can, so that the group hopefully knows, you know, where we're leaning. Obviously, I do have to reserve that there is nothing final about the guidelines until the commission adopts them. So going back, actually, it's perfectly on screen right now. We're bringing draft guidelines this summer. I think I've said in the past, we're aiming for June, the June CTC meeting. Which means that we would hopefully bring final guidelines for adoption at the subsequent commission meeting, which would be August, the August CTC meeting 2022. So a lot of the discussion we've had today has been great, and this topic is very important, but please understand that we won't know what commissioners have approved until August. So just but you'll hopefully know what staff is recommending well in advance of that. Thanks, Naveen.
Kayla, can we address some of the written comments as well? Thanks, Matthew.
Yes, hi Naveen. So mostly comments. I'll start first with Mike Woodman. He said that he supports the 2-year cycle. Shauna Goss also said, echoing Kenneth Cow, I also support leaving a 2-year funding cycle. This next one is from Adrian Cardozo. I liked the 2-year cycle in the last cycle, but I think it would be helpful if the funding years lined up with the last 2 years of the STIP so that larger projects can be funded through multiple programs. The last 2 years of the 2022 STIP are 25-26 and 26-27. So if funding could be available through 25-26, that would help us align multiple funding programs for priority multimodal projects. Next comment is from Ryan Motashemi. I know this was discussed at the previous workshop and was wondering if there was a development regarding the granularity, of the application due date. Around when would CTC expect to determine a more granular due date than winter 2022?
That's a great question. I think as we move into the next year, and I think as Matthew was saying, once we kind of get closer to drafting those guidelines and adopting them, I think that would be around the time that we can actually iron out a specific date. Sorry for the vague response.
So, Naveen, please don't get upset with me. Would late November or December be granular enough? Because as Naveen said, you know, my team is not a very large team, and we will be taking on the review and evaluation and recommendation of three huge projects or programs, forgive me. So we know that in order for our stakeholders to build in adequate resources and to plan accordingly, we need to let you know how soon we're going to ask for your applications. I know it says winter 2022 there. Forgive me, I don't even know what day winter starts. I mean, does it start in December? I'm outing myself as not having a strict knowledge here. We're looking at, you know, the November, December timeframe for applications to be due. Just hopefully that's more granular, because I know winter could also extend all the way through February. And I can assure you that won't give us enough time to evaluate and make recommendations by the time we expect to.
And I think Ryan appreciates that November, December clarification. So I think we're good.
Okay, Naveen, we do have just a couple of more comments and questions.
Sure.
Peter DeHaan, like you referenced earlier, said that you may want to consider the approach of the active transportation program, where part of the year 3 and 4 funding is available and part held back for the following cycle. And then lastly, Mike Woodman did send in another comment. In addition to his support for a 2-year funding cycle, he said the hybrid option does have merit. And that's all we have right now for comments and questions regarding the funding cycles. And I'm not seeing any more hands raised.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Celeste and Kayla, and everybody for your comments and a very robust discussion we just engaged in. With that, I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is key topics for subsequent workshops. So in the upcoming workshops, we plan to discuss CAPTI, which will be continued, CEQA NEPA, which we kind of addressed a little bit again today. We will be discussing evaluating CMCPs, the integration of equity, performance metrics guidebook, pro-housing and efficient land use with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, project nominations, and timely use of funds. I don't see any questions or comments, Kayla. If there are none, then I think we can move on to the next slide.
Hi, Naveen. We did receive a late comment regarding the funding cycles. Would you mind taking that now?
Yeah, let's take it.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the slide really quick so that it's up, and I can go back and read the previous comment if you need me also to. But Patricia Chen said, I think we should discuss OCTA's suggestion regarding fiscal year 26. So would you like me to read the comment that came in regarding that?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, give me just 1 minute. So that was the one from Adrian Cardozo, and it says, I liked the 2-year cycle in the last cycle, but I think it would be helpful if the funding years lined up with the last 2 years of the STIP so that larger projects can be funded through multiple programs. The last 2 years of the 2022 STIP are 25-26 and 26-27. So if funding could be available through 25-26, that would help us align multiple funding programs for priority multimodal projects.
And I believe that is pretty similar to what Teresa was saying as well. So Patricia, did you want to come off mute to address what specifically you wanted to discuss?
Yeah, I read the comment wrong. I thought she was saying that the last year of the STIP was FY26, but as I think about it, it's not. It's FY27. So I was thinking that that was an argument for going to a 3-year instead of a 4-year program. So sorry about that. It was a do-over.
No problem. I'm glad you asked, just so we could clarify it for anybody else who had the same thought. Thanks,
Okay,
Patricia.
Naveen, that's it for written questions and comments right now. So I'll go ahead and move on to your next slide.
Awesome. So to recap, today we reviewed and engaged in a robust discussion about CAPTI Strategy 1.1, funding restrictions, eligibility criteria, and Cycle 3 and funding. In terms of action items, I think there are a couple, some of those were sidebar conversations that people wanted to engage in to discuss whether or not their proposed projects may or may not be eligible for SCCP funding. So we will try to reach out to you directly, or feel free to contact us directly, and we'll go ahead and get something scheduled and on the books, and we'll let this group know what the result of that conversation was, just to follow up. The next is, I believe there were some proposed language changes that we addressed and again engaged in robust discussion about, so we will go ahead and make those changes and get back to everybody about what the changes we made were and see if there is more feedback or if everybody is in concurrence to that degree. I don't think there are any other specific action items resulting from this meeting at this time. So I will move on to next steps, which is that we will post the workshop recording and this presentation on the Commission's website. The next SCCP workshop will take place on Thursday, November 18th from 1 to 4 p.m. and we will be posting the agenda for that workshop in the upcoming weeks. It will also be emailed out to all stakeholders as well. And the next slide, please, Kayla. So at this time, I'd like to open it up generally to any other questions or comments. If you want to revisit a previous slide or you want to expand more on any specific discussion or questions, by all means, go ahead and raise your hand or type a question in the box. And I see that somebody has raised their hand.
Hi, Naveen, this is Kayla. We do have one written question, and then I'll turn it to Celeste for the raised hand.
Okay.
This question goes back to eligibility from Patricia Chen. She said, just want to make sure that integrated corridor management is eligible under advanced technology such as intelligent transportation systems. Thank you.
Can you say that one more time, Kayla?
Sure. Just want to make sure that integrated corridor management is eligible under advanced technology such as intelligent transportation systems.
That's a good question. Matthew, are you able to answer that?
Earlier, I'm neither a planner or an engineer. That is a great question. Probably a softball question. I can ask my engineers. So Patricia, we'll get back to you. Again, kind of goes with the. Let me make sure I understand the nuance so I can provide an accurate response. I'm thinking it is, but please don't quote me.
She said, thank you. Go ahead, Celeste, for the hands raised.
Thank you. First up is Paul Krupka.
Thank you, Naveen, Matthew, and everybody else joining in this discussion. I'm a fan of Kenny Cow too, by the way, so I would vote for him if we're giving out prizes. Anyway, my attention went to timely use of funds, which I know we're going to talk about in another session. But when we were talking about cycle, I always think about, well, when do I have to have the money after allocation? When do I have to use the money after allocation? In section 22, timely use of funds, the term contract is listed. It says after award of contract, the implementing agency has up to 36 months to complete or accept the contract. In the word contract refer to a construction contract?
I will again preempt Matthew, but I believe so, yes.
Okay, thanks, appreciate it.
Naveen, yeah, good answer.
Appreciate it, thanks.
Thanks for the question, Paul. Anyone else? Any questions? I see some more raised hands.
Yes, there's one more raised hand. Gus Corey, you've been unmuted.
Yeah, thank you so much. I missed the previous conversation on just vehicle miles traveled. I just wanted to make a point that I hope is well received. I think all of us have a vested interest in trying to tackle climate change. It's real. It's ravaging the state. I think there's a commitment, I think, by everybody to try to accelerate the investments and try to get these multimodal systems where we can encourage mode shift. But that's often not pragmatic everywhere across the state, especially in jurisdictions that don't have the population density to support some systems. And so we're still going to have to make investments to improve the existing infrastructure that we depend on for, again, goods movement, for tourism, for evacuation purposes from natural disasters and that sort of a thing. And so one thing that I would just implore the commission to analyze is with respect to assessing vehicle miles traveled, that there's some proportionality when we're viewing vehicle miles traveled in an urban area versus a rural area, because again, communities are spread apart, and so it's a bit of a challenge, I'm sure, as you know, to try to make it all coalesce together to have a true multimodal system. So appreciate the opportunity to speak, and we look forward to working collectively with everybody to make a dent on this thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gus.
All right, Naveen, I don't see any more hands.
Okay, I will again make a final call for comments or questions before I move on to the next part. I don't see any.
Not seeing any written questions or comments at the moment.
So for latest commission news and updates, you can always visit our website and follow us on social media. The Twitter and Facebook handles are linked there, so you can just click on those and follow us there. If you have any general questions or comments, you can also email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov. Lots of C's and A's there, so I do recommend just clicking on that link so you don't inadvertently email the wrong address. For specific inquiries regarding this program or SB1 programming, you can contact us individually using the information provided here for myself and Matthew. We will do our best to respond as soon as possible. Next slide. And this is the last one. So I wanted to thank everybody again for joining us today. We really appreciated the constructive and informative discussion and feedback. And we really are looking forward to seeing you all at the next workshop to continue our discussion about program guidelines for this next upcoming cycle. Before we all sign off, I do want to take a last check for questions or comments, anything that you've thought of right now or anything you want to follow up on right now. We'd be happy to take any of those questions and comments. We do have a little bit of time left in today's program, so just let us know if you do. I'll give it a couple of seconds here, and if not, then I think Kayla can go ahead and end the webinar stream thereafter. Okay, seeing none, Kayla and Celeste, can you confirm you don't see any raised hands or any additional calls for comments?
Hi, Naveen. No questions or comments in the questions tab, and I'm not seeing any raised hands. Is that correct, Celeste?
Yeah, no raised hands on my end.
Okay, well, thank you everybody very much for spending your Friday afternoon with us and bearing with us through this very long meeting right before the weekend starts. We really appreciate all of you, and we look forward to future discussions. Have a really great evening and an exceptionally restful weekend. We'll see you on the other side. Bye.